Okay, let's make a start. Others, I think, will join us. Can I first of all, as a matter of housekeeping, say to everybody that our guest is in Ukraine at the moment, and has commitments there. So I'm going to end this meeting at 6:45 UK time. So we have 45 minutes in total today, and therefore, when people come to pose questions, either directly via our usual method or in the chat function, please be concise if you want to say. Then we'll get to as many as possible. The next meeting that we will have scheduled is the former Lord Chancellor Robert Buckland MP, who will be speaking to us on Tuesday the 1st of March at 6 p.m. Plenty of subjects there about the rule of law, human rights conventions. If you want to ask about that Robert will be able to speak out, because he's a very long-standing supporter and member of the forum. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Radek Sikorski this evening. Radek was active all those years ago in the Polish democratic opposition to the Jaruzelski communist government, and was one of those whose actions helped bring about the advent of democracy in Poland. He had managed to get out of Poland when there was the crackdown before the final triumph of democracy in Poland, and spent time in the UK. Was at Oxford University, where he met a number of currently senior figures in our party, and also worked as a journalist. Went to Afghanistan and worked with and reported on the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. I got to know Radek when he was Foreign Minister of Poland. He previously been Defense Minister of Poland. And we sat together on the General Affairs Council and the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union during the Russian annexation of Crimea and Russian intervention in the Donbass in 2014. So Ukraine and Eastern Europe more generally is a subject that our guest has really become an expert on, and he's somebody, I think it's fair to say, does not look at the Kremlin with any kind of starry-eyed faith, but has a very hard-headed appraisal based on his knowledge of how Russia has operated. So without more ado, as time is limited, Radek, you are very, very welcome. Thank you for making time to speak to us this evening. And anybody who's, please put yourself on mute, given that we've got a line from Ukraine. We want to have as good quality as possible. And Radek, you're very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for the generous introduction. I should say that when General Jaruzelski imposed martial law, I gained political asylum in Britain, for which I'm eternally grateful. But I'm one of those people who went back to their country of origin. And yes, I send you fraternal greetings from Eastern Ukraine, from Zaporozhye, to be precise, which was the last Polish outpost in the east on the Dnieper River border for about 300 years. We have just returned from Mariupol, which was fought over in 2014, was briefly captured by the rebels and then taken back. It's a port with two huge metallurgical plants, a port that used to export clay, believe it or not, and iron ore and grain and receive containers and steel. And now it's down just to steel and grain. There's a kind of economic stranglehold on the port and the city. It's 20 kilometers from the contact line. We were briefed at the port, at the airport by the Ukrainian military. And in their sector, the tension is not rising. But I think we're all safe in assuming that the Americans have to know something that a colonel at the tactical level in Ukraine doesn't necessarily have to know. So they must have some intelligence which suggests that something may be cooking. I have to say that I was alarmed when I read that manifesto of President Putin's back in July, which was basically a manifesto for either vassalization or partition of Ukraine. And he forced all his soldiers to read it, which sounded to me like an ideological preparation for some kind of action. I think President Putin's minimum plan is to heighten the tension so much that there's capital flight from Ukraine. That's certainly happening, already $12 billion. And so as to prevent Ukraine from becoming a successful pro-EU democracy. Because his number one interest is for Ukraine not to succeed. If Ukraine succeeds, the Russian people may want similar measures, and that would, of course, be an ideological and practical threat to Putinism, to kleptocracy, to President Putin himself. His maximum plan, I think, would be to gain influence over all of Ukraine. His idea is to divide the EU back into its constituent parts, while simultaneously organizing a multinational union around Russia. He's calling it the Euro-Asiatic Union. It has a customs aspect, it has a military aspect, as we saw recently in Kazakhstan, but it's not a serious union without Ukraine. He wants parity with China, with the US, with the West, and he can't have that without Ukraine. So preference number one, persuade all of Ukraine to join his union. And he was willing to pay for it. He was also willing to threaten Ukraine. I think the lesser order objectives would be to unblock the flow of water to Crimea, to free the straight highway from Moscow to Crimea, to deprive Ukraine of its industry around this area along the Dnieper River, and perhaps to take its main port in Odessa. He's made preparations. We don't know whether he's given the final orders. Perhaps he doesn't know himself. But it's an eventuality that we have to treat seriously. And it's a crisis in which countries are tested. And I'm very happy to say that Britain has come up to scratch. I hope this is payback for Skripal, for Litvinenko, and these British anti-tank weapons is exactly what Ukraine needs. So if the estimates are correct that Russia has around 1,200 tanks around Ukraine's territory, then if you count the Trump era deliveries of javelins, the new deliveries of javelins, and the British contribution, then Ukraine has probably more or less one capable anti-tank weapon for every Russian tank. And that's something that President Putin needs to take into account. We're here as a delegation of the European Parliament, including our French and German colleagues, and these are EPP colleagues, center-right. Their heart is in it, but we need to tell the German public and the German government that he who is against arming Ukraine with defensive weapons is for war, because deterrence works. if a woman is training in combat techniques to defend herself against rape, that is not warmongering. That is not encouraging rape. That is prudence. That is deterrence. And this is exactly what Ukraine is doing, and it's exactly what we should be helping Ukraine to do. We should also be very honest in telling President Putin in advance what we will do in the economic and political sphere if he invades a democratic, sovereign member of the UN and OSCE in good standing. In fact, a country which gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal in exchange under the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 for security guarantees, first of all from Russia, secondly from the United States, UK, France, and China. If Ukraine is allowed to be overrun, then the world's dictators and the world's aspiring nuclear powers would have in future no reason to trust our security guarantees. So we have an interest in helping Ukraine defend itself in that way as well. The Nordics, Sweden has heightened its security in Gotland, Finland has put its forces on high alert, the Baltics have rallied round. In a crisis, you'll find out who has the guts and who is your friend in need and who isn't. I'm disappointed in the speed of the new German government of learning the ropes and learning the nature of the Russian administration, and I'm also disappointed. You know, an earnest pro-European that I am, I'm disappointed in the EU reaction to this crisis because and this has antecedents. It's because the Normandy formula and the Minsk formula basically went around the Lisbon Treaty, around the common foreign policy, and the result is that the Russians are talking to the Americans about Ukraine, which is on the border of the EU and whose fate is a vital interest of many members of the EU and the EU itself. It's not a happy situation, and we need to fix it in future. Let me end by saying that President Putin is not getting it entirely his own way. The Americans seem to be supplying real-time intelligence to the Ukrainians, and as a result, not only at the strategic level, but also at the tactical level, a couple of provocations that would have been pretext for war were defanged in advance by being named by the Americans from their intelligence sources. President Putin has no element of surprise. And if the Americans continue to do that, and the Ukrainians have American situational awareness and will know exactly where the Russians are going to strike, then it's going to be a very different war from what President Putin imagines. And the Ukrainians are not entirely without chance. They are outnumbered, but not overwhelmingly. My Polish military sources say that 150,000, even 170, is just not enough troops to overwhelm Ukraine. And the Ukrainians have their own anti-ship missiles, they have some anti-aircraft stuff, and they have the anti-tank weapons, which means that there would be real losses on Russia's part. And I think if they lose, the generals I talk to say that, you know, it doesn't work the way it works in movies, that the tanks don't go on until the last one is destroyed. If a unit loses 15 to 20% of its tanks, it turns around. And so if the Ukrainians manage to destroy 200-300 tanks, actually the offensive might grind to a halt. And I think we should draw the lesson. The strategic pause has come to an end. The time of consuming the peace dividend should come to an end. And we have a revisionist country on the border of Europe, which is not shy of using very nasty traditional methods of 19th and 20th century coercion. And it's high time that we should respond to it. And I hope Britain, even though you're outside of the EU, will be a part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Radek, thank you very much indeed. First question from Amber Rudd.
Thank you, David. Hello, Radek. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here. Such an interesting point you made about Britain's experience with the Skripals informing what we are doing now. And I think it's absolutely right, and it's particularly relevant given that Boris was, of course, Foreign Secretary at the time. And I recall talking to him about the responses that we had from different countries. And Italy was one of the countries that was less than supportive, really, compared to other countries when we needed to make a stand against Russian aggression. So my question is, you referred to Germany's slowness about standing with other Europeans. Is it being overcome, and is it putting other people off in terms of European unity, or is it, as you suggested, just a learning curve? And other European countries, are they all supportive of the EU position and trying to make a stand, or do you find others are a bit slower, like perhaps Italy? Thank you.
Well, President Putin is using the energy weapon. He not only has built this Nord Stream pipeline system, which essentially goes around Ukraine. He needs to be able to deliver gas to Germany while fighting a war with Ukraine and while cutting Ukraine off and depriving it of transit fees. Same with another pipeline across Poland. So and Italy is one of the distributors of Russian gas. So and there's a huge lobby in Germany to and huge resources invested in this project. But the German government has already said that if in case of an invasion, Nord Stream will be on the table as a possible sanction, which of course might also put Britain on the spot, because the Russians like stealing their money from the Russian people and keeping them elsewhere. And of course, the City of London and London is one of the places where they do. So you need to decide about how serious you're prepared to be in going after illicit money, not just in the banking system, but also in the property market and a few other markets. And I hope you let them have it, because this kind of money corrupts not only them, but also us.
Thank you.
Thank
John
you.
Bowis, please, and after sorry, Radek, I thought you finished. Please go ahead.
The Americans seem to be providing. I'm done.
Thank John Bowis, and he will be followed by Nicolas Maclean.
Yes, thank you, Radek. And I think if you look at today's newspapers in London, the answer to your prayer may be forthcoming in terms of seeking out and changing the law if necessary to make sure that Britain can play its part, as you suggest. But I'd like to just go back to the German question. And you famously said when you were foreign minister that you might probably be the first Polish foreign minister to say you feared German power less than you feared German inactivity. And I just wonder how you would refine that today in view of the change in Germany from the Merkel era to a somewhat uncertain coalition there. And of course, vis-a-vis the situation in Ukraine, but also in the Baltic states.
Well, Germany is passive in helping Ukraine, but very active in finishing Nord Stream. And as you know, the former Social Democratic Chancellor of Germany is in the pay of Gazprom, and seems to have more influence than I would have expected. So this is all playing out in Germany. Germany is in a very fine position. Large country, the largest in the EU, surrounded exclusively by allies and friendly states, which means that you feel secure, you can have a trade policy and an industrial policy. Your geopolitics is done by the Americans, your external security is provided by others, and you can consume the peace dividend and lecture others about the dangers of militarism. But they have to snap out of it because I think in the current crisis, their credibility is really suffering. Their weight inside the EU has risen in proportion as a result of your departure. So it's very difficult now to do anything serious inside the EU and with the EU without the Germans being on board. But they have to be credible also towards their neighbors. We are beginning to say, well, we are spending over 2% of GDP. Basically, we are protecting you, and it's unfair for a poorer country to be providing security to a richer one. Germans need to take into account not just of the possible war in Ukraine, but of the fact that Putin has installed nuclear-capable tactical missiles in Kaliningrad, which now have the reach to Berlin. This kind of stuff used to bring down German governments in the 70s, and now I don't hear a squeak. I think we're going to have a very lively discussion at the Munich Security Conference next month.
Nicolas Maclean.
Radek, could you talk a bit about the Belarus factor? Because you've mentioned a possible tactical move or strategic move on Odessa to the south, but is it a risk for Kiev itself that the Russians and Belarusian forces might simply make a dash to the south and take the capital?
I was poring over a map today and thinking, what would I do if I were Putin? And I'll tell you what I would do. If I were Putin, my first line of advance would be from north of Kharkiv, cut through to Dnieper. That's only about 250 kilometers, and it would put essentially all of southeastern Ukraine into a cauldron. But I would simultaneously advance on Kiev and perhaps stop halfway so as to tie down Ukrainian forces there and make it make it impossible for them to intervene. And I would then do a seaborne assault on Odessa, depending on how the first strike went. I'm not sure he has enough forces to do all three simultaneously. But the fact that Lukashenko stole the election and had the civil strife and huge repression, and the Russians rescued him and have taken him on a much tighter leash than before, is of course a huge factor in this situation, because I think previously Lukashenko would not have allowed them to do what they've now done. Since 2008, he didn't even recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And Ukrainians tell me he's, for years supplied them with some spare parts for the military. So this is now a big factor. Yes, Belarus is now much more aligned with Russia than before. We can't hear you, David.
Harbour, please. Malcolm, have we got you?
I'm here, yeah. Well, I was thinking the same way as Nicolas Maclean. I was interested in the prospects for any regime change in Belarus, but I think Radek has convincingly answered that question by suggesting essentially that's off any immediate political agenda, and presumably any of the basis for change presumably will be overshadowed or rather overawed by that stronger Russian presence.
Did you want to comment further on Belarus, Radek?
Well, I mean, you can't exclude that he might just dash for Kiev and try to, capture Zelensky and, go for real hardline repression and cleansing and all kinds of stuff. And one wonders if the Ukrainian leadership would have the speed and the determination to say, move the command post and the capital to further west, to Lviv. I don't think Putin has the resources to occupy all of Ukraine. This is a big country. So he has to think in terms of stages, at least.
Thank you. Dominic Grieve and then Sajjad Karim.
So thank you, David, and thank you, Radek. I share your pleasure that the United Kingdom is about to do something about Russian money, although I have to say, as past chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, I'll believe it when I see it, in light of their suppression of our report for 9 months, for reasons which I think were linked to the embarrassment which parts of it might have caused them. But could I ask you about France, which I came in 2 minutes in, so I might have missed a bit. But you've discussed Britain's role in the Ukrainian crisis, and I agree, I think we're doing the right thing, I hope we are, and the Germans' approach, which is troublesome. But what about France, which seems to have quite an ambivalent approach to this? It may be that it's more sophisticated than ours, but at times makes one think that in fact the French are hiding behind the absence of an EU policy to actually take a strong position of their own.
Well, France has the presidency. France was actually crucial during its previous presidency in 2008 during the Georgia war. It was Sarkozy who negotiated the ceasefire. But let's remember that number 1, 2, and 3 priority for President Macron is winning the presidential. And so he needs to be cautious. He made a speech in Strasbourg at the European Parliament, which I listened to, which was a little strange. He was offering Russia some kind of new security architecture in Europe. I mean, I'm not in principle against it, but Russia first has to respect the old security architecture in Europe. OSCE was founded as a result of the Helsinki process in the 70s, which, if you remember, what the West wanted was some protection for dissidents inside the Soviet bloc, and what the East wanted was the recognition of existing borders, however they came to be for historical reasons. So, there are all these reasons why Russia needs to demonstrate that she respects international borders. And I do slightly blame France and Germany for going for this for freelancing, essentially. The Lisbon Treaty is shockingly clear about how we are going to conduct foreign policy in common and how we will loyally support agreed positions. Basically envisaging that the arena in which national interests should play out is the Foreign Affairs Council, and after that, it should be the High Rep and the President of the Council carrying out the policy. So individual member states should essentially withdraw from these national initiatives and do it at the behest of the High Rep, which is not what Germany and France have done. And usually when you break the treaties, as in Growth and Stability Pact, as in the Schengen Pact, you have trouble, and we do. And you can't simultaneously complain that EU is ineffective in foreign policy while freelancing at the same time. So France is going to be cautious, I think, for understandable reasons.
Sajjad Karim.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Radek. I wanted to raise an issue regarding social media. We know that Russia has a substantial capacity to utilize social media to spread misinformation. And undoubtedly, they are using, and they will increasingly use this for propaganda purposes. How alive are we to this in Europe, and how can we be best prepared to counteract this?
Oh, yeah. They spend huge resources on this. Remember, the anti-vax movement was something that the Russians started way before the pandemic, and it paid huge dividends for them in terms of creating havoc in the West. We were, as I mentioned already, we were briefed by a Ukrainian colonel who was acting commander of this part of the line of control, and he said that within hours of him taking the post, there was this barrage of social media attacks on him, his family, and so on. So it's both at the strategic level, you know, affecting the West and Western publics, but also at the tactical level here in Ukraine. But again, Putin is not going to get it all his own way, because Ukrainian and Russian social media are intertwined. And of course, there's no language barrier. Practically everybody in Ukraine speaks Russian, and there are many family links. So the kind of information, a kind of curfew and control that Putin had, for example, during the Second Chechen War, which was part of the successful formula, I think is going to be difficult to impose. He might exclude Western media from the Russian side, but Russian people are going to learn what's going on from their cousins here. And this is not going to be a popular war in Russia. I think if Russian casualties go beyond 10,000, Putin will be in trouble.
Karina Robinson.
Yes, hello, Radek. I mean, absolutely fascinating to have you there on the front line. Thank you. I wanted to ask about refugees, you know, the new weapon, as we can see with, you know, Belarus and Poland and the EU in general, sending refugees our way is a great weapon. How do you see Putin using this both now and possibly in the future?
Well, I don't think it's going to be an issue with regard to this particular conflict, although we expect between 1 and 2 million Ukrainians to cross into Poland and the EU. But if there are Ukrainians, they're not going to be a problem, because we already have over 1 million Ukrainians in Poland, and they're just, you know, guest workers. And they're culturally much closer to us than Poles are to you. So actually, they'll be seen as a demographic augmentation of our poor record. So no, the problem on the Belarus-Lithuania and Belarus-Poland border is that these are imported Muslim refugees. Sorry, this is how it's seen. And the difference between Turkey, Greece, or Libya, Italy, is that Lukashenko invited him. You know, he first unsigned the readmission treaty with the EU, and then abolished visas for Jordan, Pakistan, and a few other places. And then literally encouraged his travel agencies and his immigration services to bring those refugees to the border. And I think he probably didn't expect Poland to be quite as tough and sometimes mean as our government proved to be.
Sergei Christo.
Thank you, David. Radek, thank you so much for such an excellent briefing and such an honest one as well. I wanted to ask about populism and the way it was used by various people, including Putin, to seed discord within members of the EU, various alliances, etc. And as you know, populism has been a problem in the UK and also in Poland. What is your vision for populism going forward, and how can we counter it?
You know, this export of populism has actually been quite well documented, and I think we're quite aware of it now. What I think is more interesting, particularly for this audience, is traditionalism by the Russians. I recommend to you a paper published by CSIS in Washington. The Russians have used church connections, financial support for ultra-traditionalist institutions and circles in France, in Greece, and in Poland, to alienate those groups from their own societies and from Western liberal democracy. And I think they've been quite successful at it. Yeah, we need to, I mean, you don't know how lucky you are to have the BBC. The Germans still have strong private media. Ireland, imagine if the BBC was taken over by Breitbart and you have the picture of Polish public media. It's really nasty. And it's the Putin playbook and Putin and Orban playbook.
How do we counter it?
And it's very, very difficult. And it works. You know, the combination of National Socialism plus unscrupulous use of public media means that you have 1/3 of the population, which in every country has some authoritarian tendencies, kind of forged into a sect. And, you know, to have the guaranteed support of 1/3 of the population is not bad. It's not bad. It's, you know, if democracy is a system in which the government can lose, then, you know, having a core of support of 1/3 is pretty good for the populists.
Rupert Borden.
Thank you very much. My question, we all know that the borders of the former Soviet Union are to a large extent arbitrary and they're porous.
All borders in Europe are arbitrary.
Yeah. If the worst were to happen, would an independent, pro-European, NATO joining Western Ukraine, which has a history of its own independence, would that be an acceptable compromise, or would it just mean that Kazakhstan would be the next target?
It's not a compromise to allow a country to be partitioned by an aggressive neighbor. You know, I was at the NATO summit in 2008 when President Putin was already talking about Ukraine being an artificial creation not long for this world. You have to give it to him. He's been telling us publicly and openly about what he intends to do. We just didn't believe that he meant it, not for the first time. You know, if you take the borders in Europe in 100-year slices, with the possible exception of the UK, and you imagine that countries try to go back to some previous status quo that they like better, that's a recipe for war of everybody against everybody else in Europe. And we fought 2 world wars to get away from that logic. And President Putin has broken that taboo, that you don't change borders in Europe on the pretext of helping your compatriot across the border. Plus also, he should have learned in 2014 that Russian-speaking Ukrainians were fighting back his forces. Odessans, Russian-speaking Odessans were demonstrating President Putin don't liberate us. You know, if Putin has the right to conquer parts of Ukraine, then you have the right to reconquer not just Ireland, but Canada and the United States as well.
I emphasize that I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying if the worst came to the worst.
That's fine. Just to sort of follow from that one, go to Terry Edwards, and then I'm going to go to Asia Odriozola. Terry, are you there? If not, Asia, can you unmute yourself, please, and ask a question?
Can you hear me there?
Yes, that's great.
Yeah, I was wondering, hi Derek, or Radek, sorry. Are we live in the post-Munich conference moment, or the post-Sudeten partition in Czechoslovakia, or the pre-invasion of Poland in the 30s? I mean, of course, each one, they had their own dynamics, but where do you see the similarities today? As well, where else would you see Putin's line of action beyond Ukraine? Maybe the Sahel or the Middle East, or even the Caribbean, as they already suggested in the Russian government. Thank you.
If he wants to bail out Venezuela, he's welcome to. No, I think we are somewhat pre-Munich. In other words, when Western powers are allowed to have the illusion that he's only after the Russian minorities, and certainly before marching into Prague, right? But we know how that we've seen that movie, and we know how it ends. He's an opportunist. He essentially exploits our mistakes, you know, our mistakes in Syria, our mistakes in Libya, and so on. So, but you know, bullies can be deterred. You just have to be firm.
Radek, I'm going to claim chairman's privilege. Last question. Russia. Putin is not going to be there forever, however long he clings on. What hope, if any, do you have that Russia might take a different course? And what, if anything, can we in the West do to try to help that to happen? Well,
you know, Russia usually forms itself only after a lost war. So if Putin gambles too much and loses, then he'll be in trouble. The problem is that, you know, when Khrushchev overextended himself in Cuba, there was a group of people called the Politburo who said this man is dangerous and we have to replace him. There is no such arrangement in Russia right now. I guess, you know, the military could deal with him the way they dealt with Beria. You know, that's the trouble with autocracy, that it doesn't have an instrument of peaceful succession. That's why the fact that China abolished its 10-year rule is so concerning. You know, you have some liberal-minded people in every country. You know, Poland is kind of split down the middle, but in Russia it's only about 15 to 20%. So I'm not optimistic that those 15 to 20% can overcome the structural preconditions and encouragement to autocracy. I mean, the silver lining in the last 30 years has been that, you know, there's been killing of journalists, of politicians, but more kind of retail rather than wholesale, which, you know, is not saying much, but it's better than in the past. But at least now you know why we were so desperate to join NATO.
Radek, thank you so much for giving up your time to speak to us this evening, despite a pretty hectic schedule in eastern Ukraine. And I think I'd speak for everybody on the call in the UK to say, you know, please pass our message of solidarity and support to Ukrainians that you meet. And I like others who have visited Ukraine, know you go and speak to people in Kiev or Dnipro or Lvov. They are wanting the same things. They have the same hopes, aspirations in their lives as people in London or in Warsaw or in Brussels or Strasbourg. You know, they are a European country. And one of the ironies of the 2014 intervention, I reckon it's been to make Russian-speaking Ukrainians feel more Ukrainian than they did before Putin intervened. So wish you well, Radek, for the rest of this evening and afterwards. And can I ask everybody just to express their virtual thanks to Radek Sikorski for a fascinating tour de force this evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And remember that there is now a EU-UK delegation and that there is a EU-UK friendship group in the European Parliament, of which I'm the deputy chairman. Plenty of friendship, comrades.
Excellent. That's very good news to hear. All the best to you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.